I'm going to start with a question. Are you okay? Are you okay? How are you feeling? Feels like that question has been the subject of quite a few things this week, including mockery. But it's still a good question. Are you okay? Now, often we might say, are you okay? Because we don't want somebody else to ask us if we're okay, or we're saying, are you okay? So it gives us the opportunity to tell somebody else how we're not okay. And I think that's what happened this week. But it's still a question that we don't often like to have asked of us, especially if we don't want to say the answer. And often the answer can just be, yes, I'm fine. So I thought I'd start by addressing the metaphorical this morning elephant in the room by asking you, are you okay? And then I thought we'd talk about anger, because I got angry this week. I felt like I got very angry. I felt like I got a lot of things out when I was angry, and that was a good thing. And so I thought we'd talk about anger, and almost about anger mismanagement, because anger management can tend to be what happens and what we want to do. And I know that because when I was a youth worker and I worked in schools about 15 years ago, I did anger management classes with young people who had, quote, problems with anger, and the schools didn't know necessarily what to do with them. The problem is I had no idea about how to deal with anger. I was just there helping young people process theirs without any experience of processing mine. Just because I was calm and patient doesn't mean I had any idea about how to process anger. So let's start with a question. Not just are you okay, but what are the myths that you've heard about anger? What are the things that you've heard about anger that actually are myths and aren't true? And I've got a few here. First one, it's not okay to feel angry. The second one, anger is a sin. Anger is a waste of time and energy. Good people, they don't get angry. Some of these are in this book, Codependent No More. We'll lose control or go crazy if we get angry. People will go away if we get angry with them. Other people should never feel anger towards us. If others get angry with us, we must have done something wrong. If we feel angry, someone else made us feel that way, and that person is responsible for fixing our feelings. If we feel angry with someone, we should punish that person for making us feel angry. If someone feels angry with us, it means that person doesn't love us anymore. Anger is sinful. It's okay to feel angry only when we can justify our feelings. What about the myths that you've heard about anger? Are they some of these? But sometimes the bottom line is, and this was my bottom line, and I wrote this down, we can be frightened of our own anger because we've held it inside for quite so long. So what about you? What about your relationship with anger? What about the question, and I was asked this question a few years ago, what is it that I get angry about? And when I thought about that question, I realised my answers were, I got angry when I saw injustice and somebody else getting hurt. I got angry at politics and the system. I got angry when I thought about how somebody was wronged. I was angry at other people. I was angry because I couldn't be angry. So what about you? What about when you feel angry? What are the things you get angry about? Maybe that's a sign about the things that you not necessarily value, but the things that you invest emotional energy in. So what are the myths you've heard? And what are the places that you, when are the times you get most angry? What if you get angry because you're angry at yourself, because you feel you've let other people down? You weren't as perfect as you thought you were. You weren't as good as you thought you were. You didn't make it in the way that you thought you were going to. All those expectation things. And often that anger, we can turn that on ourselves. So do you get angry with yourself? Do you beat yourself up? Self-critical anger. So let's talk about anger. Man, when do you get angry? And what do you get angry with? What do we need to change in our beliefs about anger? What do we need to change about releasing that emotion? I remember a story, and you might remember this, it's quite a famous story. Some of you will remember Chris Evans. Chris Evans was, for those of you maybe outside of the UK, Chris Evans was quite a famous TV presenter. He dated quite a few famous actresses and pop stars, including Billie Piper. But he also had quite a big TV production company, and he did TFI Friday and You Say You Forgot Toothbrush and various other things back in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s. And so Chris Evans, he was prone, the press usually caught him for being angry and a bit hot-headed. And he told this story, and it has always stuck with me. He said, in the studio, he had two live wires, two like dynamite live wires, starting at his desk on the studio. And he said that there was a live wire, a little short live wire that ended up going to a small chocolate cake, like a chocolate muffin. And so he lit the live wire, and the little live wire fizzed across the desk, and it exploded this chocolate muffin. And he said, this is kind of me, this is how I process my anger. There's a little live wire and there's a little explosion like that. And there's quite a lot of those, because there's a lot of times where I know I feel angry and it's like that. But he also, one of the answers said was there are other people who have a long live wire, and it's a long kind of tripwire, goes all the way along the desk, went all the way down the desk, he went all the way down the end of the studio, out the window. And if you remember that studio, it was like an old house, and he dropped this kind of wire all the way down the outside of this house and into a big container. There was this great big massive chocolate cake, and it exploded this chocolate cake. And he said, now which is more healthy, the people who have a long wire with a long thing and this great big explosion, or tiny little bursts of anger and tiny little explosions of chocolate cake? And I remember thinking then, and I remember thinking for a long time, I don't do any of those. I don't get angry at all. It's not good for me to be angry. I'd processed and internalised that anger was a wrong thing to do. And I wasn't angry. Wasn't angry at all. But then I realised that I wasn't angry, but I wasn't when I was angry, it was as if I got angry at other things. But I definitely wasn't angry about things that would affect me, or the things that would mean that I had been wronged. And I know that where some of that comes from, and that's not necessarily for tonight to explore. But I would internalise so many things about not being angry, about being that was sinful, or I wasn't allowed to express my emotion, because actually there was people around me who would abuse me for showing that emotion, tell me off for being emotional, because that meant that they had to be concerned with my emotions. and I was there to soothe theirs. So I wouldn't get emotional. I would fear my own emotion. It would be inside. So I remember those 2 fuse wires and the 2 chocolate cakes. But I remember when I was about 15 or 16 watching that going, yeah, but I don't get angry at all, and maybe you shouldn't be angry at all. And I was wrong. I realised I was wrong. But that's what I'd internalised, and that's the only way I could feel maybe secure, or like that's what I had processed. So anger, and let's talk about anger. I often hear that one of the reasons men go to football matches is to get that anger out. Okay, fair point. But I think what I do when I go to a football match is that I get angry at a football match. But that's not really the reason why I'm angry. The reason I'm angry is something else. So what I've kind of done there is not dealt with the thing that I need to deal with, but I've replaced that, or it's almost like I've transferred that anger and that emotion onto the way my football team is playing or not playing, or even somebody else's football team is playing or not playing, or the way somebody else is behaving. But the real reason that I'm angry isn't being processed and isn't being dealt with. So, as I said, I got angry this week, and I got angry, and I can't tell you why, but I got angry because I felt hurt, and I felt an injustice, and I realised that what I'd been through wasn't right, and what I'd had to deal with as a child wasn't right. And actually I was angry, and actually I was furious, and part of the process for me healing over the course of quite a number of years is to get used to swearing. As my friend said, like, you need to swear to get some of that out. And so, like I said a few weeks ago, like, we need to give a fuck about something, but actually we need to give a fuck about saying the fuck word, to get it out, just to let that word come out and let it out. And it's not going to hurt anyone. It's not going to hurt anyone. And actually, reality, it hurts more people if we leave that inside, because somebody else gets it and it stays inside. It doesn't hurt anyone if I say that word. It doesn't hurt my neighbours if I say it really loudly 20 times in my lounge. It doesn't hurt the people of the town I'm walking round when I say it. It doesn't hurt them. But what might hurt them is if I take out anger in a way that is more explosive and more destructive, and that wouldn't be healthy. So, what did I do when I got angry? How did I process anger in a good way? And I'm going to tell you in a moment. There's a chapter in the back of the last chapter in Edith Eger's book, The Gift, and she says there's no forgiveness without rage. She says, for many years after she survived the Holocaust, I had tremendous problems with anger. I wouldn't acknowledge it. It terrified me. I thought that I'd get lost in it, that once it started it would never go into end, that it would be totally consuming of me. But as I've said before, the opposite of depression is expression. What comes out of our body doesn't make us ill. What stays in there does. Forgiveness is release, and I couldn't let go until I gave myself permission to feel and express my rage. Silent rage is destructive, self-destructive. If you're not actively, consciously, internally releasing anger, you're holding on to it, and that's not going to do you any good. And she says, neither is venting anger. That's when you blow your top. It might feel cathartic in the moment, but others foot the bill, and it can become addictive. You're not really releasing anything, you're just perpetuating a cycle, a harmful one. The best thing to do with anger is to learn to channel it, and then dissolve it. So what have I learned to do with my anger Because I used to pretend it wasn't there. I used to pretend I didn't have any. I used to pretend, or at least I used to think, that it was better not to feel anger or feel any emotions at all. But that clearly wasn't right, and it wasn't good for me. So along with swearing to myself, I wrote things down. And I wrote things down with a great big fat purple crayon, and I just scribbled, and I scribbled at the paper, and I threw bits of paper around the flat, and I threw cushions around the flat, and I cried, and I swore, and I've listened to angry music this week. If you've known of her, the artist Rory talks about a lot of emotional pain, and actually that's been very cathartic for me to have somebody to listen to whose anger I can relate to a little bit. And I've written things, and I've processed things, but you don't know about that. At least I haven't written about it publicly, because that's for me. But I wanted to share with you a little bit about being angry. And what happened afterwards was, when that anger came out, part of that anger was helping me see what was behind it. And what was it? Mostly grief. Grief for what I didn't have. Fear itself for what I was frightened of. And I was released from holding something and trying to hold something in. And maybe it's not like a chocolate cake after all. Maybe it's the champagne cork. Because champagne is this potentially lovely, fizzy wine that's pointless to anyone when it's underneath the cork. And that cork needs to be released, and then the good stuff can come out. But imagine shaking that bottle of champagne for years and years and years and keeping the cork on. Eventually that bottle is going to explode, and you can't even drink the champagne. You have broken glass everywhere. So if the opposite of depression is expression, then it's time to let some anger out. And maybe we've mismanaged anger. Maybe we've mismanaged anger because we're afraid of it, but we see it expressed in unhealthy ways. And if you're scared of being angry and you just can't do it, and I get it, I really do get it, then get some help. Find somebody who you can sit with and throw cushions at and swear at, who's going to just not swear back, because I'm just going to accept you for being angry, because you were pained and you were hurt and injustice happened to you, but you've been manipulated to think that you shouldn't be angry. At least I was. And if we're angry, we've got something about us that we want to defend and fight for ourselves. And if we're angry, we've got something to fight for and defend, and that might be our family and our partners and our spouses. And anger is a good thing, because it means we can defend ourselves. It means that we can say no when the simple thing and the easy thing before might have been to say yes to keep the peace. And anger might help us say no, that's not right, and that's not right for me, and I have something to defend myself. If you want to rage at me right now, I can't hear you. Rage at the screen. We need to talk about anger. We need to think about the myths about anger. And maybe we've bought the lies about anger because we've seen it destructively. And we've been frightened of ourselves for our own anger because we've hidden it for so long. And there are various myths about anger caused by in various places. But actually it might be a good thing if we know how to process it properly, and it is a good thing if we know how to process it properly. So I don't often talk about one particular emotion, but I thought this tonight, because this week I'm learning about anger, I'm learning about my own anger, I'm learning about and continually learning that it's a good thing. And it's a good thing to cry, and it's a good thing to process the things that shouldn't have happened to us and be angry about them and annoyed because it wasn't right. So, first things first, let's not believe the myths. Second thing, let's accept that we can be angry. And third thing, let's do that in a way that's healthy, and let's reflect on the things that cause us to be angry and take action on those things and defend ourselves. Are you okay? Thank you. This may have been an angry rant about anger. I hope it wasn't. As I said, I just thought it would be good to talk about it tonight. Thank you for watching and listening. Do post a comment below. Do share if you want to, and thank you for being you. And remember, this is the Healing for Men channel, and the world is a better place when we are too. So thank you, and have a good weekend. Bye for now.